Welcome to Philly Coco Presents Side Project Spotlight, episode 23. This is a developer's journey into making cool stuff. We are the Alfred to your developer Batman. I'm Kotaro.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Aaron.
And we are Philly Coco, a Philadelphia-based Cocoa Heads community focused on Apple development. That primarily, but not exclusively, means iOS, Mac, tvOS, and watchOS development. Philly Coco's true desire is to take you higher on your own developer journey. Ooh, all right.
Nice.
That's
we're butlers for an enigmatic billionaire, possibly psychotic superhero vigilante.
That's pretty much like all rock and roll developers, right?
That's right.
Rockstar developers, I mean. Yeah. Anyway. Oh my goodness.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, today we joked that I had made a mental breakthrough with this whole UI UX experience. But before we get to that mental breakthrough, I just want to do a quick follow up on the conversation we were having about respecting the platform from last podcast. And I think it was sort of a reaction to the React Native Notion brouhaha.
Yeah.
Where the Notion people had moved their app into away from React, or they used native controls was actually the
I don't know what they're moving from specifically, but they said that they got speed improvements from native, and then there were developers who tweeted like, well, of course.
And then there were developers that angrily refuted it, and
we had some tribal warfare going on Twitter, which is pretty much normal for Twitter.
It's a normal thing. And then I think Discord, one of their recent releases was, we did it on React, and then you had the sort of like, again, the follow-up brouhaha, like this like contentious, like really like kind of pretty immature in a lot of ways, this sort of like back and forth about why people should, why React is the future, or why native is, better, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Like, it's everything to me in that sense is like, whether or not you use React or native, are you respecting what makes that platform special? What makes that environment special, right? To me, that was like an important bit of that conversation that gets lost a lot of times, because I remember building apps with cross-platform, intentions, and the sort of the it's like death by a thousand cuts, because you're basically developing for the lowest common denominator in the end. So there's a lot of things that you couldn't express because of it doesn't, if it's great in one platform, it's not great in another platform. A simple example might be like your Lottie animations, that if you wanted to put Lottie animations, you couldn't do complex Lottie animations in Android, because that would like kill the performance of Android, and like it would just, the animations would like the sort of complicated animations with blur effects and alpha channels and all this, blend mode situations, that performance you can get really well in an iPhone, it just wasn't very optimized for Android, right? There are reasons that I find, and there's a lot of other things that could happen on Android you get for free that you just like, the whole conversation about stuff that shows up on Android first, but then eventually comes in iPhone,
or like a working audio assistant.
Yeah,
get that for free on Android, right?
Right. So
sorry, Siri. It's been so long. Still kind of sucks.
Right. Or like if you're an app developer, like how do you ensure like, okay, can I take advantage of these assistants? Right. Their implementation's different, and no cross-platform environment's going to help you with that. No. Same with widgets, right? You would still have to do those natively. And the funny thing to me is like a lot of app developers are sort of missing. Those are missed opportunities, because those widgets are proactively put on homepage by the user, right? It's not something where they have to like, you know, they have to find that app icon and tap on it. That's like that size of a grid of 4 icons in one widget that goes directly to your app.
Yeah, and if it's on a home screen, it was intentionally put there, which means someone went through the effort.
Yes, exactly, exactly that, right? And so it's a missed, you know, like so when they talk about this, you know, app discoverability or app, you know, like app getting lost in the forest of, you know, a user's list of apps, it's like, well, you're not taking advantage of those opportunities because, you know, you're too busy trying to make sure that what's inside your app is the same.
And widgets are provided by the native platform. I mean, you might be able to access them through like another
like a plugin
environment, plugin or something. Yeah. But like just for that particular example, I find myself searching now more often for in the widget selector for apps that I was like, oh, do they have a widget for this? Because that would be useful. It's like the more you use them, the more you kind of have a network effect. Probably not the right word, but the more you use it, the more you think about using it for other apps too. And then you discover the app doesn't have it, and you're kind of disappointed. At least I am.
Yeah, I mean, again, like that's just one small example.
Yeah.
But I think the other situation that I've always I remember talking about was like the dynamic natures of the screen and the keyboard. How an app works with the keyboard is like it is a nightmare a lot of times especially when you're dealing with cross-platform development, and if you're not taking that,
or even like sometimes on native platform like the early SwiftUI, right? Keyboard keyboard stuff. Did you have a whole talk about that?
I think that is a hilarious counterexample of, and you can make an argument that if I was not, you know, like I was sort of like in this weird, like bizarro world of like in between states of like, well, it's not really native. It's native, but it's not really native because it doesn't have access to a lot of the native tools. And so you deal with sort of like half-baked stuff like keyboards coming in and like overlapping, you know, the text field or something.
Yeah, that's like the exception that proves the rule. And like in that case, you knew that SwiftUI at that time was still very, very new and unpolished a bit. It was still young and in active development. So so if you encounter that, you know, on a non-native platform, that, you know, that makes even more sense.
I mean, you know, it's one of those things where it can be solved with time, elbow grease, and just a lot of testing, right?
Yeah.
But
that's kind of the point, though. I mean, if you're going to have some collection of things that don't quite work the quote unquote native way when you're using some like third party system, and that it's going to be different collections of things depending on, you know, the systems you're using and what you're building and stuff. And so I guess you have to kind of decide which bag of optimizations you're willing to deal with if you're going to go with like a third party.
I struggle with that a lot, to be honest, of like, if I'm a project manager, or if I'm a product owner, I should say, and my team is much more like React Native, their skills are in web, we cater much better to React Native, you know, I almost have an obligation to go that route, just from a skill set point of view, versus like if I had one quality iOS developer and one quality Android developer, like reasonably seasoned senior developers, that works equally well, right? As opposed to having them both learn React Native.
Yeah, I mean, that's the situation I'm in. I'm the iOS guy, and we have an Android guy, and we coordinate very closely on feature updates, and so that works out well when you have a team that's that small, where we don't have any communication problems, and we're both trying to build, you know, parity as much as possible in the apps. But then we also build it for the platform, so we try to make them feel at home.
I remember working on a project that was cross-platform, but it was done natively. Me and a colleague, Dex, was on a contract, and he was the Android guy, I was the iOS guy. And it was a nice dynamic of sense of like, okay, this is how it works in iOS. And he would read my code and he'd be like, oh, okay, I pretty much know the equivalent, how to do it equivalently in, Android. And we'd just do it back and forth in terms of like the sort of like the user interactions, like when does this happen? How does this happen? That kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, he might have his own little style that fits closer to Android that he might incorporate from time to time, and he was given that freedom to make those decisions. And same with iOS on my side, and it worked really well. I thought that was an interesting dynamic that I liked a lot. But that doesn't really work or scale very well if your team is very large and it's a very big application. At least I should rephrase that. It's hard to coordinate well.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I would think
Mythical Man Month. It's a classic. The more people on the team, the more the communication overhead. It can make. I think last time, I think we said that it can make sense to do some quote unquote cross platform. Like we're talking about like a third party development environment for building apps, and there's lots of valid reasons why you'd want to do that, and there's just always trade offs. So you just have to be aware of them and select the trade offs that make the most sense for your particular project and situation and team and company and business goals and etc.
Yeah, and
time. I think you brought up the idea that it depends on what time you are too in your development cycle, or like maybe in your business, like early on versus more mature product, versus maybe changing your customers to who you're targeting, etc. Like the business requirements are what should be driving maybe some of these decisions in a broad sense.
Yeah, that's tough because it's always I'm sort of always struggling with the, like, I'm not opposed personally to learning React Native, but I'm always it's almost like I feel like I feel more comfortable in the native environment. It just fits me in a better it's one of those things where I feel like I get more direct access to a lot of the meat of the APIs and the frameworks, and I can play with them in a much more direct manner than I think with React Native, which is, I don't know. Again, it speaks to my ignorance of React Native in that sense, or Flutter for that matter, in those contexts.
Well, if you were a React web developer and now you're on a team trying to build a mobile app for Android and iOS, I mean, React Native is definitely something you'd probably look into.
Sure.
I mean, because again, as I said, the business situation and your team situation, your skill set, these things are all variables that go into what your selection ultimately is.
I mean, I almost hope the idea is like the skill sets can lead the real React Native skill sets can eventually lead you into SwiftUI or vice versa.
I mean, to some degree, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know exactly. I haven't really done any React Native, but I mean, there's a lot of like fundamental skills with building any kind of piece of software or mobile software,
Sure.
And the specific things you might learn about the syntax or maybe some specific style of programming might be different, but you're still going to be using a lot of the similar kinds of constructs and concepts from computer science. And
I mean, I will say, as somebody that's been doing a fair amount of SwiftUI for the past year and a half, full time,
you could be a worldwide expert right now in SwiftUI.
No, Aaron's the worldwide expert at this point.
No, I'm definitely not the expert.
Oh, you are. Oh, my goodness, this guy's killing it. But I mean, we've been doing a lot of SwiftUI prototyping. I think with SwiftUI as a prototyping tool, I find to be really, really good. Like better than I would have expected, and especially good with introducing to junior developers. So if a junior developer, aspiring aspiring developer that's coming from like web and wants to aspire to do iOS development, just go straight SwiftUI. It's still needs just a tad more baking in, but for the most part, it's ready. It's production ready. You go in and enjoy. It's just so easy to just build your components and build up your views and then break them out into components when you feel it gets too complex or repetitive, and it just makes refactoring a joy to play with because you're not dealing with so much lines of code, and you can organize in a lot more componentized fashion, and it almost feels to a certain degree like a codified version of like Sketch in that sense, where you take a lot of these bits of parts of the views and you like extract them into their own. In Sketch world they call them symbols, but in ours I guess we just call them components or whatever. But like it's just it makes it easy to build up a prototype app, legit app, in a span of like a week, less than a week in some cases. And I'm not even talking like, okay, we'll just build like one view with like some basic interactions, and we got like a whole app of like 4 tabs of views that we're working with all these sort of complex interactions and animations. I mean, it's just amazing. And for the most part, it's like you can get somebody fairly inexperienced or zero experience for that matter to be very productive in a short period of time. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, Aaron, but that's what I observed with SwiftUI.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I didn't really see anybody coming right from the beginning, so I don't know.
I'm more beginner than you guys. I mean, I'm not a beginner anymore, SwiftUI, but I'm more beginner than you guys. Less experience using it day to day. Recently, I've been trying to use it exactly as you describe. I'm trying to design like maybe a new screen for existing app, and that's written in like Objective-C and UI kit, and I'm like, well, I could prototype it, and we could move into the prototyping discussion if you want. But I could prototype it a lot of different ways, and I was thinking, well, why don't I just try SwiftUI? So I made like a little test app, and I just started building a screen to try out the same features that are already existed on the web. And it was a nice experience because you end up with not just a nice looking kind of a high definition mockup, which I think makes sense in this case because we're updating an existing app. But you also end up with like this very clear structured code, where it explains like how it works in a way that's a lot more clear than often the code looks when you're doing like a UI kit up. Version, especially in the app I'm trying to update, where I have a lot of customizations to how you do things like tables and stuff. So you're using like, I have to end up using very custom API calls, and so you end up with like lots of code all over the place that makes sense. It's like componentized stuff in the software, but when you're just trying to mess around with the view, like what it looks like I would never try to do this in like UI kit.
When I think about prototyping in SwiftUI, which I get, it's almost like a trap in a way, because there's a difference between...
We need that sound effect now. It's a trap.
It's a trap. But it is a trap, because a lot of times you could get caught up in like okay, well let me like add a little color here, and you've already set yourself up with the trap if you start adding like basic colors. But let me add some haptics, let me add some sound, let me do some animation transitions of like, and with SwiftUI you can build and create like very complex animation UI transitions, stuff that would be a pain to do in a UI kit. It's relatively straight. It's relatively, like a simple card flip would be a good example of like, I mean, technically it's not that hard in UI kit, but like in SwiftUI, it's literally like one line of code. It's just, it can be absurd like that sometimes. And I think So you can be more expressive with how you do your layouts, because it falls much closer to almost like HTML, like doing HTML layouts these days, where, I mean, minus the extra gazillions of brackets, but I think it has the level of expressiveness that I think you can do. It's like, oh, I can link this in this nav button here, and then I can transition there, then add an add button here and create like a partial sheet or a full sheet, and then do that relatively quickly within a couple lines of code, and then boom, you have a fully interactive app. You send that through test flight to your product owner or your client, and then you could just be like, and then of course they get excited, and then you get excited because they get excited, and then you're all excited, and then just doing, next thing you know, you're building an app, you're building a prototype that acts like an app, and then your product owner is like, so this could be in the App Store, right? And like, no. Don't mind the spaghetti code in the background there.
I haven't looked too deeply in this, but I was wondering, I was like, as I was doing this prototyping, it was just this one screen. I'm like, could I maybe actually use this? Like some of this view code, could I actually take this SwiftUI and like use it in my UI kit app? Like how painful would that be? And would it be more painful than just re-implementing it with all the APIs and stuff that's already being used? And like, I don't know. I don't know. But it came to my mind because I was like, man, this is so much easier than doing this the other way.
So my recommendation from that strategy, I mean, I've seen it done, but I almost prefer like a separation of views if you're going to go that route of just saying, you know what, if it comes in through a modal, right? Like it comes in from, you press add item or something, and then it opens up a modal sheet. That can all be done in SwiftUI. And then you come down, as long as it keeps sort of the context. It's like if a better way to look at it is like if you're going to build another storyboard, maybe think about putting that in a SwiftUI view.
Yeah, well, this would be like a view pushed in, sort of. I don't. It's a complicated kind of navigation style. It's basically by itself. Like,
I mean, you could still do that. I mean, you can still do a push. I mean, the other simplest thing is like anywhere that it has like static data that doesn't require too much interaction.
This has a lot of static data, and it requires like maybe a button, like a link, that kind of thing to open up. But it's pretty much static information. So
yeah,
there's like that's why I thought about it. I was like, oh, this might be good as a trial run to see, because I might as well maybe give it a shot. Look at whatever the do you remember what the UI kit class is, the controller for that?
It's a UI hosting controller.
Yeah, UI hosting controller. So I could try just building a UI hosting view controller for this one screen, and then see how well it'll work. And that won't take too long. It's worth the attempt, because if it does work, if I can hook it up to everything else, that would be a nice way to start transitioning UI development.
Yeah. I mean, as a if you were to ask me, so talk about cross-platform, just imagine cross development environments, right? If you were to ask me maybe a year or two ago, do I want to incorporate any SwiftUI in my UI kit app, I would 100% say no.
But now, I mean, I might be able to get away with targeting like 15.
Yeah.
Once 16 comes out. So
sure.
That's what I was also thinking, because I'm not sure how well it would work if you were targeting. It came out in 14, right? SwiftUI, or did it come out in 13?
13. SwiftUI. I think it's 4 years old, so.
Yeah, 13.
It's older than I thought. It's older than I remember. Damn, that pandemic's really messed up my whole sense of time. But yeah, so one year.
It's how I feel about my nephews sometimes. It's hey, weren't you this cute little kid? What
happened?
When did you get this growth spurt?
Like 3 years have happened.
What's happening? Why is your voice so deep? Like, Dad. No, not Dad. Uncle.
Oh my God!
Don't say that. Anyway.
That's funny. But no,
it's
I like
not that deep, but
but even if you just use SwiftUI strictly as a prototyping tool, you're ending up with like high fidelity mock-ups more than like a wireframe. It's not. It's. I guess you could technically use that as like a wireframe tool, but because it automatically renders things like lists and stuff in the iOS way, you end up with something that looks like a functional app, even if it's just a screen. So I think you have to keep that in mind because it depends on what your audience is, but sometimes that's not what you want. Because then people get caught up on the details about the colors or the fonts or something like that.
Yeah, I mean the other thing too is like you give them the false impression like, oh well, we just have to add the logic in and you call it a day. But
just add the brain,
the meat of it, and it's great. It's, what are you waiting for? It's like, guys, no, that's not how this works. But but that's the magic of it in a weird way because it's using quote unquote native controls. It's using all the the bounce effects, the UI transitions, the timings, the all that is native in that sense. So it feels real. When you're, because it is technically, but like when you're going from like view to view to view, and you're seeing these views just like in your hand, really, that's the magic. Because once you see, it's one thing to see these wireframes that look beautiful. And this happens all the time where people will build these low to high fidelity wireframes, clean, pristine, and then they build the app. and you're like, what happened? And because the magic is because when you design these things, you don't think about how they actually look on screen. You only see it in one screen. Right, you're not seeing it in all the different screens variations, right?
And that's a wonderful thing about SwiftUI and the previews and Xcode.
Sure.
That you can just set up a whole bunch of previews. I mean, I guess it depends on how powerful your computer is because they're not, they're a little resource intensive after a while.
M1.
But yeah, at least an M1. But you can set up a bunch of these, and now with the latest beta Xcode, it makes it easier for you to switch between like light mode and dark mode to see the changes. I mean, it is very, very tempting. And if I was building a brand new app, I could totally see why you might want to go that route because it could potentially save you the steps of making like a very low. It depends. Like you might not want to jump right to it depending on how complex it is because then you're spending time figuring out how to implement SwiftUI. But for a lot of stuff that's like pretty straightforward and you're not doing anything really custom, I feel like you can use it as a straight up prototyping tool and just like, I need a list, I need a navigation stack going on here, I need to push some windows, I need to open a modal. Those kinds of interactions are just built in, doesn't require much effort to get them wired up.
Even if you're doing a complex interaction, let's say instead of your traditional push, like you press a list item, it pushes into the detail view, right? That's a typical user interaction in iPhone and Android. But let's say you have a grid of photos, right? And the product owner wants to press a photo and have it expand into the full screen, right? Like zoom into the full screen. In UIKit, that's kind of a tricky proposition. Doable, but there's a lot of setup. Using, I forgot what it's like, UI animation. It's like there's like an animation delegate, and you have to like set up this whole scaffold this whole setup just to get the sort of the transitions to work cleanly. Whereas in UIKit, it's like, okay, well, we just set up we can zoom out and have a geometry reader to check on the sizing and then expand out from there, or I forget exactly how it works. But like basically it's not that complicated to do. It's absurd in some cases. If you want to add a rotating spin while you're at it, sure, we can do that.
Yeah, and I keep coming back in my mind. It's like, oh, I'm going to build this prototype. And then if we like this, I can take this view code and directly start, building an app with it, potentially. Like I don't have to throw it all out like you do, or re-implement everything from scratch in some new language. Like if you use something like Sketch, which you're using, we're gonna. I think our next topic is gonna be that, how you've been making a UI, and it's like Sketch is great, and you can also kind of run the Sketch app on your phone, but it just goes from screen to screen. Balsamiq is another one I've used in the past to do like that kind of thing. But no matter how good it looks in Sketch, for instance, you're still going to have to build it now in something. And so you have to re-implement it.
Depending on how extra you as a company wants to be, right? So when I mean extra is like, if it was just you and me or us, right?
Yeah, which is us. Which when we're building our little to-do list app, right? Or habits app, whatever we're going to call this. We don't need anything more than Sketch. Which is for anyone who doesn't know, Sketch is a great vector art application, but it's mostly known as UI UX wireframing tool. So if you wanted to create several different screens of what your app would look like, just to draw it out and lay out your application's layout, that's a really good program to use. Now, people have moved on to Figma because Figma is a little more collaborative and cross-platform, whereas Sketch is much more Mac exclusive. But you're drawing things like you're literally like taking it's kind of more like a Photoshop in a sense, like a much more kind of controlled focus.
Like if you want to compare it to Adobe stuff, it would be more comparable to Illustrator because it's a vector graphics.
Yeah, but you're not like writing like in SwiftUI. You're not writing declarative syntax. You're directly manipulating the images on the screen. That's the big difference.
Yeah, it's vector art. When it first came out, I mean, it was probably what made it great is that it was a great Mac app. And I mean, I forgot exactly what period at that time was. It was certainly, I would say post period of when there was like this idea of what it is to make a great Mac app. Like people took pride in making Mac apps. It almost became like a weird competition who can make the most aesthetically pleasing Mac app. So they would have like an app that would have like when you're burning a DVD, you had like a toaster of like when your DVD was burning, it would have like a simulated smoke.
I remember that.
Toast app or something, toast disk toast or something like that. But it was like bizarre like skeuomorphism, but like in the best way possible. Like it was like more extra than it needed to be, but at the time it was just a way of like expressing the personality of the app. And so Sketch was kind of like more on the tail end, and I think it was much more of like it followed a lot of the Apple Mac HIG, the Human Interface Guide, and it looked very traditional, right? But its best feature was that it was very easy to just slice and dice shapes and sizes to do, to build up your wireframes. But because before Sketch, you would normally build a high fidelity wireframe, basically a high fidelity, like a screenshot of what the app would look like. You would do that in Photoshop, and that was a pain because Photoshop is just not meant for that. First of all, it's raster, so everything's by the bits, and this was during the skeuomorphic days, so everything had to have a texture, and so you had to like export one or 2x size, 3x sizes of like resolutions of each texture. So you had linen and you had like wooden nav bars and stuff like that. Just really, like stuff that had like textured titles, right? Like you had to do like really, really weird, like really, like the designers almost took over like the prisoners took over the asylum kind of situation where like the designers were just doing all sorts of crazy ideas of like highly complex textured apps that really didn't really, you couldn't, there was no clarity of it. It was almost like a weird it's like a weird like Magic Garden hodgepodge of stuff. But it was we're
talking like Sketch is no more, like like it died.
Well, it's not so much that it's no more. It's just it gave up its dominant position because everybody used Sketch until Figma became a thing. And Figma became a thing because it was like cross-platform. Like it performed well on the website. It performed well.
It's like you planned that transition right back onto the theme
of
cross-platform stuff.
Well, I'll be honest, I don't like it that much.
What, Sketch or Figma?
Figma.
I've tried using Figma. I agree with you. I don't have an up-to-date subscription to either.
Yeah.
So I haven't used the up-to-date Sketch.
Yeah.
But every time I ever use Sketch, it was, for me, a better experience.
Yeah. I think it's just everywhere in there feels very hidden in a weird way. Like the inspector is very weird.
In what app are you talking about?
Figma.
In Figma, okay.
Figma is like once you figure out the tools, it's fine. But like trying to like do like very organized, like set up your stuff in a very organized way, feels it doesn't seem to encourage that.
Yeah.
From what I've seen of Figma files, and tough part is like you're doing it in a public fashion because like you're sharing these Figma files on the Figma platform, and you just like sometimes it feels like it's I'm never quite confident of the state of a Figma file.
So
it doesn't feel like it's fully like it's fully refreshed. Like with my Sketch file, I kind of know, like it gives me a very clear indicator of like, okay, this Sketch file is up to date and don't worry about it. And for the most part, it's all local, right? Because it's a Mac app first. They're trying to eventually migrate to the web, but like that's a tough transition.
Yeah. And of course, Figma being this cross-platform collaborative thing, if it makes sense to use it for UI development in the early stages, especially when you have a lot of people,
sure,
and especially when it's cross-platform. So in that case, you wouldn't really get an advantage of using SwiftUI directly as a prototyping tool. You might actually have to be at a disadvantage in that point because you need to collaborate and maybe synchronize development across platforms.
I mean, this is my. I guess this goes back to my sort of like.
And I'm talking about prototyping a mock-up, not prototyping.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like when you're talking about collaboration, like in a way, it's about trying to create a space where everybody can sort of say, okay, like we're all like reviewing this design. It's almost like we have a ton of. It's one thing to have like 5 or 6 chefs in the kitchen. You've now got like 20.
You need a common set of artifacts. I mean, I remember in the past I was working on this app, and I was trying to work with a designer, and so I think I might have talked about this before. And I was using EB5, I think it was called. It was like this like plist file that system. So I'd use that to set fonts and colors and stuff, and that way the designer could change them in that one file and then run the app in Xcode, and it would change stuff. So it was a little easier to collaborate that way. So I could see SwiftUI being even easier. Like theoretically, you should be able to use a storyboard that way, but in practice, it doesn't really work that way where you can just have the designer mess around. SwiftUI actually gets us even closer to the idea, I think, depending on how you write it, of course, that a designer could like directly go in there without necessarily knowing all the ins and outs of like Swift and help change things to a degree. But it's not really designed for that though. So I feel like that's kind of like a special case where you have to have the right people for that. But something like Figma or Sketch is designed for that kind of collaboration.
It is in a lot of ways. If you want to update the title of the nav bar, for example, the style of the nav bar,
it's very obvious how to do it in Sketch or in Figma versus even SwiftUI.
I'm sure there's there are comparative ways to do it in both, but I mean basically you would create a style of some kind. It's very similar to like style sheets in like CSS, right? Of like there's an area of conformity you can create. SwiftUI it's a little more malleable, so there's not one way to like create an overarching configurable style that a designer can go in and like configure. And
you'd have to like, create it.
You'd have to create it,
but it's not that hard. I mean,
no,
with a little bit of a forethought and some conventions, even.
Yeah.
You could create like a struct or structs that contain a lot of the theming information for stuff. And like I can imagine in my head right now, very similar to like what was doing before. And also I think this was an example in the Stanford course. I think they do this there too, where they take variables and they put them into like a little struct to change them and stuff, to mess around with, I think, an animation in one of the videos. So same kind of thing. But the difference in SwiftUI versus when I was doing this many years ago with a UI kit is that you can get much more immediate feedback. And if you're a designer comfortable enough in Xcode, you could sit there with the previews open. You could mess around with these values, and then you could get the animation just right, the colors just right. That's what I'm thinking in my head. Like SwiftUI opens up that door to that kind of more, I'll say, advanced mock-up / prototyping collaboration with the designer.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's tough because like it'd be hard to like really find a tooling for, like, you could do something where you can almost create a tool for him to like dial his tweaks in and then have that saved.
I mean, with the like inspectors thing, and like I hardly ever use it, but the like preview inspector in Xcode, when you just click on preview stuff and like tweak things like you would in like Sketch or something, which is like sliders and input fields, so you don't actually have to, interact with the code.
I think the only caveat for that is like, I don't know if there's a way to save that state, right?
I think it just turns it back into code, right?
Yes, it does.
It instantly like updates the code.
Well, then you go.
Without you.
I don't know how. I mean, I haven't tried this. If you move things into like a struct or something, and then it's being referenced, like a color is being referenced, or something like that. I don't know. But
I think the whole idea is that if your designer or something is only editing inspector stuff, they're not going to break anything, because all they're doing is they're very limited in what they can do.
So there's another way of using it. I mean, especially if you don't need to do any advanced kind of theming, you're just saying here the designer just wants to tweak like a screen, maybe during an early mock-up kind of stage. Yeah, that's a great way of doing it. You can do a lot of those changes that way. You can also, have you ever drag and dropped stuff onto the preview, like the big plus button in Xcode, find some SwiftUI thing, and then it'll put in the code. But you can literally see where it's going to go, kind of on the preview, and then it'll pop in there. They did a lot of work to make previews really interesting. I
don't utilize the preview as well as I probably should, and maybe part of it's because I don't have the M1 like you guys do.
I have that M1 13-inch MacBook Pro from 2020, and I gotta tell you, man, previews are freaking awesome on it.
Need to catch up with you guys. Gotta leap you guys and get an M2. But
oh my god, I want like an M2 Max.
Yeah,
come out.
Yeah, 3mm.
The M1 Max laptops are now available. You can just buy them now. Apparently, it took how many months? And like last time I checked, like a day or two ago, I could have gone down to the mall and gotten the 1 terabyte, 32 gig Max 16-inch. Just bought it.
Just in time for them to be replaced.
I know, right? Well, yeah, I know. I probably is going to be many months before they replace them. I have a feeling, but yeah, that's how I felt.
Well, many months before they were actually available, but
I know. I was like,
them soon.
I thought, should I buy this? And then I know they're going to release an M2 model, but then it'll be another like 9 months to actually get it again.
You probably want to wait till whatever their big announcements are for like September, October, right? New iPhones aside, they always have one for like the Mac product, right? Because they want to be ready for the Christmas season. So might want to hold off until then.
Yeah, but just to like wrap up our discussion here about prototyping tools and SwiftUI and Sketch and stuff, they all have their place, in my opinion. I think
sure. I mean, I always view it as like, the way to, maybe the start is like whiteboarding or even like on a notepad.
I've been doing my iPad lately because I got one with a pencil, a little iPad Mini. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then if you want to get a little like lo-fi, Balsamic's great, because they have you can start for free, and then if you decide you like the tool, you can pay for whatever. Although I would just at that point ramp up the Sketch or Figma or InVision. Probably more Figma at this point, or XD. XD is also Adobe's product that's free to start. So any of those options are really good choices to get into just building the wireframes out. And when you're ready to do some prototyping, if iOS is your zhuzh, then go SwiftUI.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
And I think the line can be a little bit blurred with SwiftUI.
Sure.
Because I started mocking up, designing, and prototyping all at the same time with it. That's because the screen I was messing with was really simple. Like if it's a more complicated thing, it still might pay to go into Sketch first to think about it.
Which is funny you mentioned that, because after struggling for 2 whole weeks of trying to build a UI for our to-do list app, Picklejar, the Epiphany came last night. It's like, why am I struggling so? The reason why I'm struggling so deeply is because for some reason I can't get the iPhone version out of my head. And I needed to go back to the simplest thing that I wanted this app to do. And I was just trying to get around this idea, and we were talking before, everything that was talking about the card view, that kind of layout. We've already talked about this in doing a Tinder swipe type of interaction. So I decided to get out of the SwiftUI prototyping of any kind and go back to basic and go into Sketch.
Nice. And you said you had a maybe a marvelous mental breakthrough.
Yes, which basically was well, let's take what Habit did well, which I kind of
that's the app.
The app that won the Apple Design Award.
Yeah,
very beautiful. You can tell there's some game development elements in there. They took a lot of inspiration from Mountain Valley, almost too much inspiration from Mountain Valley, because there's some symbolism there that I don't quite get and almost distract.
Yeah, it confuses me slightly, but it's beautiful.
Yes. So obviously I don't want to steal too much, but I wanted to take some of the core elements. But then we had talked about this Martin
system. Yeah, that's what I call it. The
and,
Martin system.
And I've been sort of fighting this. Are we a Martin system? Are we doing a Martin system? Are we not doing a Martin system? And it's like, okay, maybe we can get somewhere in between, right?
Yeah, we're doing it was always meant to be an inspiration. We're doing, we do have the central concept of doing sprints because we're developers. And that system had cycles, which is basically the same thing, where you pick 14 days or 2 weeks or whatever.
Right.
And then the innovation I thought there was just the way that on paper he recorded, he checked off whether he did things or not for particular tasks.
So one of the things that for a long period of time, and keep in mind, we all have full-time jobs at this point, so we have very little time to really sit, emotional time to sort of change our mental, we're already tired doing whatever Swift or Xcode work, and now we have to go in and do more Xcode work.
I had to touch I had to touch Objective-C.
Yes,
so I'm extra. It's an extra hard context switch.
Yeah. So I was like, if I could figure out this metaphor of reflecting a sort of a paper metaphor.
Is that what I say? I'm looking at it. You can't look at it because you're listening to this, but now I can see what you mean. Because I thought you were just copying kind of what we did on the Watch app, and that was your inspiration. But now I see it as maybe little pieces of paper.
Right. So I'm trying and part of it is when I did it in black and white and with shades of gray, the intention was partially to just focus on, as we said, just the layout and the sort of the UI, the UI architecture. But what happened when I saw that the first screen, which was the main screen where it shows you a stack of cards and the top one being
Kotaro, before you go on, maybe you should just explain that what is the primary purpose of the iPhone, UI versus maybe some of the iPad or the Mac, because we had the idea that they're going to be the primary focus might be different.
Sure. So the primary focus of the iPhone app is just to say that I did it, right? It's just meant to be a check them off, right? So I don't want you to stay in that app for too long. I just want you in and out. I'm almost debating whether I'm even going to keep that tab bar, to be honest.
Yeah. So your screen is marked today's task.
Yes.
It has a stack of little square pieces of paper or something.
Basically, cards. Okay. where you tap on it, or you can swipe left or right or up. If you swipe to the left, it's like you said no, I didn't do it. You swipe to the right, I said yes. And if you swipe up, it says I don't, whatever our state was, like I can't explain it or something like that. The O metaphor.
Oh, it was supposed to be yes, I did it. No, I didn't do it, or or something out of my control caused me to miss it.
Right. So I have to do some kind of like helper explainer in the card as you do the swipe to explain like what the metaphors mean. Ultimately, what I want to happen is like once you've have that sort of committed, that it like commits to that yes or no state, for example, it'll collapse into a row of days, and it'll go into the day of like today, right? Or whatever day that you've highlighted.
Yeah, at the bottom of the screen, there's these little boxes that I guess I can't see them very well on the screen share, but
they basically represent the days of your sprint.
Ah, okay, excellent.
And then you can kind of drag. It's like a scroll view, so you can drag back and forth and maybe go into each one to see like the notes for each one if you have any.
I think in what's the app? I'm getting all these apps confused in my mind. The Design Award one was called
Habits.
Habits. I keep thinking because I keep using this other app that has a similar name. Habits. In that one, it seemed like I put a couple tasks in. It seems like it's like at the top. There's like the name of the task. You can kind of pop between them. I like the idea that, and like in that app, it's the checkbox. It seems to be there's just one checkbox. Like if there's that checkbox just for that one task. I like the idea of having this kind of stack and have everything for today right here, and I can very quickly update them. And you also have an option here to add notes, which I think personally is kind of important, at least in some states. Like if you don't do it for some reason.
So if you there's on the cards each one has like a notes icon, which I haven't quite decided where I ultimately want to place it. But if you tap on it, it will open. It'll hide. It'll like kind of push that icon up, and it'll reveal a text field for which then you can fill out your notes.
Yeah, and the idea there is that there's going to be a review period, like at the end of the sprint. You review it, and then your notes will hopefully tell you like a log of like how you did, and it could be anything you want to put in there. That's up to you. But then, ideally, the times you didn't do it are going to be the really important ones where you could figure out why. Like maybe you always get interrupted on Tuesdays, and so maybe you shouldn't plan that thing on a Tuesday. That kind of deal.
Right. To be fair, I don't know if that makes sense now I think about it, whether if you if you say no, right, should you have the notes open up?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. Like in my mind, if I did it, I don't necessarily have to put any notes in there. I mean, maybe I want to, but if it's something like, in your example, push-ups, like, okay, well, like, I guess I could put in how I felt doing them, but like, how useful is that to me? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if I didn't do it, if I intentionally said I didn't do it today, my future self might want to know why, especially if that happens more than once. Because the idea with, we're looking at the statistics later, is to be able to identify, like, patterns. And so if there's a pattern especially of not accomplishing something, you want to know why, because if it's some reason that is something that you could change, that might help you with a future sprint.
So from that standpoint, I might take that notes icon out and replace it with just a modal dialog that says like, can you explain why? And to begin with, maybe it won't say. It'll have it might not have any tags, but over time it will create tags that will allow you to just pick the tags. That's
a really good idea. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, I mean, if it's like a similar thing that you could summarize as a tag, yeah, well, you could just attach it, and that could be enough instead of writing anything. And I could also see maybe having a big button to dismiss it. Like if you're going to make it come up automatically, I mean, there might be times where you're like, well, I don't really want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Skip or whatever. Yeah.
We could make it a setting, but debate. That's a whole other debate. It's like, should you have settings for things?
Well, I have 3 tabs on this prototype. One says sprints, one says stats, and the other one says settings. And I was debating on whether I should call it settings. And then I was like, well, that's 3 S's. So, all right. That has a rhythm there, but I don't know.
Although I don't want to get in a whole tangent about like how tabs should work, but like settings being a tab kind of indicates that it is at the same level of importance as sprints and stats. And I just can't imagine that's actually true.
Yeah. So I just want to, it's tough because I do want to encourage, like, maybe you do want to add a note if you do a good job, right? So maybe the iPad, that's where sort of the iPad version of that can allow you to sort of, that will allow you to sort of review and much more like add, spend more time adding notes and sort of work on the analytics part of it.
Yeah, you don't want to bog down the iPhone version. You really want to be quick. Like, so I mean, the whole whether or not a modal to add notes is forcibly popped up or not is really debatable because I think it'll become obvious one way or another when we start using it, like whether we hate it or not, but that kind of thing.
I mean, I can almost, from experience, I can almost tell that I'll hate it. I guess the question is whether I should figure out a way to, how do I make that part delightful? And I don't know if a swipe gesture makes sense in that context, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you're using this app, though, you are kind of the type of person, or you're attempting to be the type of person that's making a commitment to do something on a regular basis, like create a habit or accomplish a goal by setting aside specific time or to do it. And so in that case, committing to writing a note when you don't do it seems reasonable, but
part of me might incline to like do it so that you take the card and you drag it down you drag it into your slot, right? But that doesn't make sense either. So there are a lot of UX there. The layout is, I feel like, is close, but the UX still needs to be.
Well, to give you something else to think about, what I want is a mode where the app assumes that you did it already, and then it kind of like reminds you at the end of the day or something. Oh, here's all the things that you did. Is this correct or something? So, but the whole thing is that if you don't fill it out, it's just like racking up your stats and not just like assuming you didn't do anything.
See, that's the opposite of how any of these other ones work.
I know. Well, but that's kind of what I want. I want to say like, oh, I'm doing good, and then it's like, oh, I only have to open up the app. It's like, oh, I didn't do it. I got to open up the app and like say I didn't do it. It's like that. I don't know. And I was, training a lot and stuff. And it's like, I log all my training and it happens all automatically with these different apps that I use. And it's like, oh, but if I don't do something, I have to go like make a note of why I didn't do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
I wonder if that's something that is much more like it starts out asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be all like automatic. It's like, oh, you logged this like 5 days in a row, then it just like starts assuming that you did it.
Maybe. I mean, the main downside, of course, with that is that the data can very easily become inaccurate if you just don't do it. Yeah. And so I that's the trade-off with it. But I like that idea to at least consider that. That's really good. It's
like as an option. It's like, I don't know whether you could have it trigger automatically or what. But that's just kind of the kind of thing that I would want, because I don't know if I like the idea of having to like check this box every day for me personally.
Yeah. I mean, some people love checklists, some people hate them, and I think my thinking about this is you're not supposed to have a whole lot of things, because it's supposed to be either larger things or things you're trying to make a habit of. And of course, you can't do like 12 things. You can't have like, I mean, I guess you could try. Maybe some people do that, but for me, I would use it to focus down on some really important tasks. Right. So to me, I would want to go in there and check it off because I want the accuracy. But I totally see the opposite approach, especially if you're coming from the perspective of automatically recording.
I actually kind of would find it fascinating if we could figure out, or at least come up with a way that makes it intelligent enough to sort of like it starts with a training wheel of saying, all right, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? And then slowly says, maybe like after, if you have a quote unquote streak of like a week, maybe it'll only ask for the week. And then over time, maybe if you're just like doing great for a whole month, then it might go, you know what, let's just take the training wheels off and let's assume that the person does it. But report that it says that these are. Figure out a way to report to you that.
Yeah, you could still get like a thing at the end of the day or something of like showing what it's like. Oh, my tasks that I accomplished today, and it's like, oh wait, I didn't do that. I better go and like mark that off that I didn't do it.
Yeah, I agree with Steve that I don't want to create like a weird like false positive because users are very, I don't know, they're very lazy. So I guess it's if we have like a widget, maybe is there a way to detect if they've installed a widget? Like they're actually using a widget? There must be, right? I mean, technically there is, because if they open up a widget view, we can set up app's user default to just say, hey, this guy has a widget on, right? That the app could recognize.
Not sure. I have to look at that.
But what do you mean if they have if you know they have a widget? What would you do?
If you know they have a widget, that means you don't need to be that proactive. You can just hey, you did this, right? Also, you could just say in the settings.
That's what probably I would just do. I would do that for myself. I would just make a setting like when you make a thing, a little box like when you make a thing, and just say default done or something, and you just like check it.
The Aaron setting.
Yeah, whatever. But I'm going to have that for myself so I can like log all the things that I know that I did every day is too annoying to like actually log every day.
Oh, we should have a good export mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, an export of into what though is the question.
CSV, but I think I would think people would want to be able to bring that into Excel to do more complex calculations in terms of like
I agree. Like the raw data. Yeah.
The raw data, yeah. So just a suggestion for a feature in the settings. But yeah, I think
it's really helpful to have these mock-ups here. Mm-hmm. So I think we had a more productive discussion about design features and UX than we've had on the podcast in a while. It's similar to when we were at Side Project Saturday, where we were just drawing on my iPad. Like it helped, having that artifact in front of you really helps to focus the discussion and help generate the ideas.
Speaking of Side Project Saturday, are we doing that again this month?
We're doing another Side Project Saturday Suburban edition on August 20th. We're a little like off our normal schedule for this, but playing it by ear here. August 20th at Human Robot Jenkintown, 11:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Just got the reservation done, so I'll be there, and I'm hoping Kotaro will be there. Mm-hmm. Maybe Aaron. We'll see.
I was there last time, so
I think he'll be there.
Probably.
So it'll be fun. We'll make the announcement. Well, by the time you're listening, this has already been announced, so you can find it on meetup.com.
Yep.
And also, we'll have a link off of our website, phillycoca.org.
Indeed.
I think we'll still try to do the Zoom thing, too. It only sort of worked last time. We only had one person come in, but we're trying to make that as an option going forward with everything, if we can.
Indeed, we will. Okay, so was there something else we need to talk about? I think you were about to say something before I derailed you, or no?
No, I don't think so. I think I just said I think that having the prototypes is very useful, and the only other thing we had on our list here was because iPad OS 16 might be delayed and Mac OS might be delayed, until October. That our timeline is shifted once again a little bit, and that's why we're focusing on the iPhone version right now too.
That's right. So in a way, that's a blessing in disguise because I had I needed that mental breakthrough to figure out this whole like what would make this to-do list app worth making and useful for us in a style that we want to make it.
I hope people have been entertained or found it interesting that we've been like struggling with this, because that's really what happens. I mean, like it seems so simple. It's really funny is NS Screencasts just started a SwiftUI to-do list app series, And I sent you guys in the Slack. I was like, maybe we could steal his code, as a joke. We're not really gonna do that, but it seems like a really simple thing, and it is if you just take it as completely straightforward. You can easily make a to-do app in like a weekend that works, or even less time, like in a day on SwiftUI. You really can, but we're trying to explore ideas and frameworks and concepts we haven't worked with before because it's a side project. So side projects tend to drag out. But we are determined to get this out because I told Kotaro, I was like, my goal is I want the like $5 in my bank account, even if I'm the one who bought the app or whatever, like before the end of the year. Like,
indeed. But you don't have
to buy my own app.
You can give yourself a coupon code.
Yeah, give myself a coupon. I just want what's the minimum from Apple? That's my goal. Is like, can we hit the very minimum and just have one deposit of the minimum? We'll just split. And towards our goal of Mac monitor money.
That's right. Mac was a Mac Studio
Mac
display.
Studio money. Studio display money.
That's the goal. That's the goal, guys.
Studio display money, then the Mac Studio money.
Yes, you gotta baby steps.
So what's the next steps then with this?
So next steps is for me to really iron out some of these layouts to sort of extend it to the iPad version, which I'm beginning to do now. I think I'm gonna focus a lot on I think you and I had talked about it. This is figure out a way to take advantage of people who have Pencil and make it a much more expressive tool with Pencil integration. So like having the text editor, a text view to take your notes in a lot more flexible manners. I want to do that for reviewing your notes, as well as like a way
like in Sketch. I mean,
yeah. I start in Sketch, and then once I have like a bare bones idea and we've all agreed on it, I'll just move on that. I know Aaron and you have talked about working on refactoring our core data integration.
We didn't have time to really talk about it, but I'd found I sent you the video of a talk by a developer I followed for a while and didn't realize I did until I saw this, or Donny Wals, and he wrote this whole book called Practical Core Data. I was looking for some kind of some kind of example of a good way of using core data in SwiftUI, because we keep running into this trouble of integrating it, and he ends up coming with a solution which is a hybrid approach where the problem I had, and I think Aaron you might have had too, is once you start fighting the built-in integration for things like fetch requests and stuff, you end up really fighting it. Like it's just, and you end up creating and I started looking into it. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to have to write a whole bunch of mapping code stuff. So he has kind of an in-between one, and I'm reading his book where he use like the built-in stuff in some ways, but then he also uses like the view model approach specifically, and I think this is smart, when he's editing something. Like when a creator edits something, he'll create the new SwiftUI view, and then he'll use a view model pattern there and a completely separate like context, so that you can isolate the edits in that one little view. And I was like, oh, that's really smart. And that way you kind of get best of both worlds. And then I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I think ideally also you want to centralize your fetch requests and stuff if you can. And I don't know if or like as much as you can in there. But he still uses like the integrations of SwiftUI property wrappers for stuff, especially for the getting the data out, because it works very well. And his opinion is, if I understand it correctly, is not to fight the system too much. So I am exploring that by reading his book, and I've been working on a different app entirely, just like playing around with it because I don't want to keep trying to refactor our stuff. We're in the middle of it, so I just started with something else just because he kind of has like some example code, and I'm just basically implementing his example code. And yeah, I think he is maybe the best approach I've read so far, and he has this talk. And we could have a podcast about it. Maybe we'll next time. But Practical Core Data, I'll put a link to the YouTube video, which is basically his talk form of his book, I think. I'm sure he's breezing over details, but Practical Core Data. And so he doesn't know us. I don't know him. He's not a sponsor or anything. I'm finding his techniques and ideas appealing.
He's this podcast's Not a sponsor.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Not a sponsor. Practical Core Data, the book, A Modern Guide to Core Data Framework by
Excellent.
Donny
We
Wals.
haven't done one of those in a while, so shout out to you.
Got a not a sponsor, Donny Wals.
Donny Wals. Cool. All right.
So cool. So that's I guess. And Aaron, do you have anything to add to focus on?
Yeah. Hopefully, I'll get something done with core data stuff, or we'll share. I don't know. Maybe we can like start a new branch with this hybrid approach.
We do have a weird bug right now where the Moto dialog in the iPhone version keeps dismissing itself the moment you open it. So I don't know if you want to look at that.
Take a look at when there's an actual specific thing to look at instead of just like build a whole new core data stack or something.
So Aaron's on bug fix duty right now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Fix the bugs. You are good at it though. Every time we've had a bug so far, it's been like Kotaro and I I don't know, and Aaron just figures it out right away. He just knows what's on. That see, Tony, you were the SwiftUI master.
He's the SwiftUI whisperer.
Yeah, because I've just begun to. I mean, I'm not just tipping my toes in anymore in SwiftUI, but I am by no means. I'm still looking up like everything. I find that Xcode 13 has terrible documentation for SwiftUI. Like sometimes I'll click to get the documentation, it just finds nothing. But then I search on the web and it's there on Apple's site. So I don't know if that's just me and my install, but that's at work. I'm using 13. I'm using 14 for our stuff, and I'm not seeing that problem. So, but anyway,
that's all we have for today. You can learn more of Philly Cocoa at phillycocoa.org. There you will find links to our Slack, meetup schedule, and contact info. If you're feeling generous, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcast. And please share the podcast with all your developer friends. And one more thing. Documentation is like sex. When it's bad, it's better than nothing. When it's good, it's really, really good. Till next time. Good luck on your own developer journey. We will cheer for you always.
I couldn't hold the laugh in.
It's a trap.